Hey guys, tonight we wander into the fog-draped streets of Victorian London, where sleepless souls once roamed and curious minds concocted cures you'd probably never consider. Imagine the flicker of gas lamps in the mist, the clip-clop of carriage wheels echoing off damp cobblestones, and you, yes, you, trudging along in search of a remedy for your stubborn insomnia. You're wrapped in a shawl or maybe a worn coat, not exactly cozy, but it'll do as you drift past the glow of apothecary windows advertising soothing drafts and night powders. You can almost smell the tang of horse manure mixing with roasted chestnuts. Romantic, isn't it? Or maybe not. You probably wouldn't survive one night out here without catching a cold or a pickpocket. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now as you're pressing play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by imagining a restless Victorian evening. The fire is burned low, your bedroom is just cool enough to make sleep elusive, and outside, the city hums. Insomnia wasn't new in the 19th century, people have been tossing and turning for millennia, but the Victorians approached it with a particular blend of science, a superstition, and sheer stubborn inventiveness. One night's wakefulness could send you pacing down Oxford Street, seeking relief from some unusual cure you'd overheard. The truth is, most Londoners didn't even call it insomnia. They might mutter of nervous excitability or nightly agitation. Doctors wrote in journals about restless constitutions or the wakeful habit. The idea of sleep as a medical subject was still young, and treatments ranged from charmingly odd to downright dangerous. Historians still argue whether Victorians were more plagued by sleeplessness than we are now, or whether they simply had more faith that a tonic bottle or bedtime ritual might fix it. Step out into the streets again. Fog curls around lampposts, a watchman strikes his staff on the stones to mark the hour, and you peer into shop windows advertising cures. One bottle promises sweet repose, another relief from nervous disorders. Of course, the fine print doesn't exist. No side effects listed, no FDA to regulate, just a label with swirling font and perhaps the reassuring face of Queen Victoria herself endorsing nothing at all. You'd buy it anyway, because anything's better than another night staring at the ceiling. You wander past the Thames, murky and sluggish, reflecting faint lantern light. Somewhere nearby, a sleepless clerk might be boiling water for a concoction of valerian root, its pungent smell described by one Victorian as akin to unwashed socks. Another poor soul may be standing at his window, inhaling coal smoke air in hopes the night chill will knock him out. Funny, isn't it? Today you might turn on a white noise app, but in Victorian London, the background hum was already built in, horses clopping, vendors calling, and the occasional drunk arguing with a lamppost. Picture yourself inside a boarding house. Your landlady, tired of your pacing, offers an old family remedy, a glass of hot milk spiced with nutmeg and a touch of mustard. You sip, gag, and politely thank her. Does it work? Perhaps it does, perhaps it doesn't. But at least it distracts you long enough to forget you were awake. Here's a secret. Much of Victorian medicine relied on distraction. If the cure didn't cure, it at least gave you a ritual, a sense that you were doing something while waiting for the natural tide of sleep. Meanwhile, in fashionable drawing rooms, talk turned to whether sleeplessness was a mark of refinement. Some argued that creative minds, poets, inventors, politicians simply needed less sleep. Others whispered that a woman's insomnia might signal a delicate disposition, which of course sounded far better than she's stressed because her corset is too tight. Doctors filled their notebooks with these claims, but historians still debate whether sleeplessness was a genuine epidemic or a convenient excuse for eccentric behavior. As you meander through the streets, you find yourself half amused, half sympathetic. Imagine wandering into a chemist's shop, jars gleaming under gaslight. You ask for something for rest. The chemist smiles knowingly and slides across a small vial labeled laudanum. It's opium in a syrupy disguise, guaranteed to knock you out or keep you hooked for life. Many Victorians discovered too late that their insomnia cure was far worse than the disease. Still, in the dimly lit shop with your eyes heavy and your nerves frayed, you wouldn't know. You'd take it home, pour a spoonful, and drift into uneasy oblivion. But not tonight. Tonight, you simply keep walking, past carriages and newsboys, through fog that clings to your clothes. You notice the rhythm of your steps, the steady rise and fall of your breath. Maybe that's the real cure after all, walking until your mind gives in, until fatigue outweighs worry. Some Victorians swore by it, others scoffed, but you, the sleepless wanderer, might just find your eyelids drooping as dawn edges across the horizon. Your first glimpse of morning is soft pale light brushing the rooftops. The city is quieter now. Vendors not yet shouting, the air cool against your skin. You realize that insomnia in Victorian London wasn't just a medical condition. It was a cultural experience shaped by gaslight, noise, ritual, and hope. And as you lean against a railing, yawning, you can't help but think, perhaps the strangest cure of all is simply giving up on finding one. You step back inside a narrow Victorian kitchen, the air heavy with steam from a battered kettle whistling faintly on the hob. A weary housemaid, perhaps you, pours boiling water over a bundle of roots and leaves that look more like garden sweepings than medicine. The fragrance rising from the chipped mug is sharp, earthy, a little unpleasant. This, you're told, is valerian tea, one of the most trusted herbal cures for sleeplessness. You hold your nose and sip. It tastes like the floorboards after a rainstorm, but the Victorians swore by it. Herbal teas and bitter brews weren't fringe experiments, they were staples of London's home remedies. Apothecaries stocked dried chamomile blossoms, hops, and passion flower, each with the promise of sedating nerves and coaxing the body into slumber. You might laugh, but modern science actually confirms that some of these plants have mild sedative properties. Of course, dosage back then was less than exact. 1 spoonful might calm your fidgeting legs, 3 spoonfuls might make you feel as though you've swallowed a damp meadow. Historians still argue whether these herbs genuinely worked or if their effect was largely psychological. After all, if you were convinced valerian would send you to dreamland, perhaps your brain obliged out of sheer relief. You imagine yourself seated at a worn oak table, steam fogging your spectacles, listening to the wind rattle against the window. A serving girl mutters that hops, the same ingredient used to brew beer, will do the trick. She pinches dried cones into the pot, the scent bitter, but strangely comforting. Some Victorians even sewed hops into small pillows, believing the aroma alone would lull them to sleep. Imagine tucking a little bag of brewery scraps beneath your cheek and inhaling the faint tang of ale while trying to relax. One scholar noted, with just a hint of sarcasm, that this cure was perhaps most popular among those already fond of their pints. Now you try chamomile, its floral scent lighter, less threatening. Chamomile tea was praised as gentle, ideal for delicate constitutions. Children, the elderly, and women thought to be too fragile for stronger medicines. You cradle the mug, sip slowly, and find yourself almost enjoying it. The Victorians paired chamomile with ritual, warm blankets, dimmed lamps, a moment of quiet before bed. Was it the tea or the pause that made sleep possible? Hard to say, but you can almost feel the soft pull of drowsiness, even as your stomach protests the earlier valerian. And then there were stranger brews, things less familiar to us now. Infusions of lettuce seeds, for instance, were thought to have narcotic properties. You picture yourself steeping a handful of bitter lettuce seeds in boiling water, hoping the plant that made your salad crunchy would also make your brain switch off. Reports varied. Some claimed instant slumber, others felt only indigestion. There's even record of a concoction called lettuce opiate, boiled down until syrupy and sticky, taken in tiny spoonfuls. Modern historians still argue whether lettuce was a genuine sedative or simply a case of wishful thinking. As you sip your way through this apothecary sampler, you realize the act itself was as important as the ingredients. Boiling water, waiting for steeping, inhaling steam, it was a ritual, a sensory distraction. Today you might scroll through your phone pretending that will soothe you. Back then, the sound of water bubbling and the smell of herbs filling a dark kitchen created a meditative rhythm. Of course, not everyone trusted herbs alone. Some skeptics argued that teas were too weak for real insomniacs. A man plagued by true wakefulness, wrote one Victorian physician, requires more than a teacup to banish his demons. Yet even he admitted that the ritual of drinking something warm might help. That's the paradox. Whether the herbs worked chemically or not, the moment of sipping created space for calm. Picture yourself again in the foggy London night, clutching a mug of valerian. You cough at the bitterness, glance at the fire dwindling to embers, and feel a heaviness creep into your limbs. Maybe it's the tea, maybe it's exhaustion, maybe it's the knowledge that people across the city are doing exactly the same thing, trusting that roots, leaves, and petals could conquer their sleeplessness. And as you sink deeper into your chair, you realize that even if the cure is forgotten, the hope behind it feels strangely familiar. You find yourself standing in front of a chemist's shop, its glass jars glinting under the glow of gas lamps. Inside, rows of bottles line the shelves, and your eyes settle on one in particular, a dark glass vial labeled laudanum for restful sleep. The lettering curls like ivy, promising peace with every drop. You step in, exchange a few coins, and slip the bottle into your pocket. Tonight you're not brewing another bitter tea. Tonight you're turning to something far stronger. Laudanum was the Victorian cure-all, a syrupy tincture of opium and alcohol, prescribed for headaches, coughs, indigestion, and yes, sleepless nights. You uncork the vial, and the sweet medicinal scent rises. Just a spoonful, doctors advised, would lull even the most restless mind into heavy dreams. Yet behind the promise lurked danger. What they didn't tell you, or perhaps what they quietly ignored, was that laudanum could be habit-forming and more than a little lethal if overused. Picture yourself at the bedside table measuring out a dose with trembling hands. You sip, grimace at the bittersweet burn, and feel the warmth spread through your body. Your limbs loosen, your mind grows foggy, and soon the ceiling no longer seems so daunting. For the first time in days, you might actually believe you're about to drift into sleep. Victorians praised laudanum for precisely this reason. It worked quickly, more reliably than a cup of chamomile or a pillow stuffed with hops. But here's where the story turns. Many who relied on laudanum for a gentle night's rest found themselves caught in its grip. Addiction spread quietly through London's bedrooms and parlors. Famous writers like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Elizabeth Barrett Browning struggled with dependency, sipping from bottles that promised solace yet delivered chains. Historians still argue whether laudanum was prescribed carelessly out of ignorance or whether physicians knew the risks but believed sleeplessness was a worse fate. After all, in a world without strict medical regulations, comfort often outweighed caution. Imagine walking the narrow lanes the morning after, your head thick, your thoughts slower than molasses. The cure worked, yes, but it left its mark. Your landlady peers suspiciously at the bottle on your table. The chemist, meanwhile, simply smiles when you return for a refill. Business is business. Victorian London thrived on such contradictions. Progress and peril bottled together, sold with a polite bow. Not everyone approved, of course. Some doctors railed against laudanum, warning of moral decay and unnatural drowsiness. Religious pamphlets declared it a sin, a dangerous crutch leading the faithful astray. Yet the same critics might themselves take a quiet spoonful before bed, justifying it as medicine, not indulgence. That was the Victorian way. Preach restraint, practice flexibility. You can almost hear the debates, one camp praising laudanum as a miracle of modern science, another denouncing it as poison. In smoky gentlemen's clubs, in quiet kitchens, even in courtrooms, the discussion played on. For you, standing here in the fog with the vial in hand, it's less about philosophy and more about the simple desire to close your eyes and rest. The taste lingers on your tongue, syrupy and sharp as you climb into bed. The ticking of the clock grows faint, your thoughts blur at the edges, and though you know the risk, you let go. Sleep, heavy, dreamless, and almost too deep, finally arrives. For the sleepless Londoner of the 19th century, that was enough. The fog is still thick when you stumble back into a cramped Victorian kitchen, this time greeted not by pungent valerian or syrupy laudanum, but by the homey scent of warm milk. Someone has set out a tin mug beside the hearth, steam curling up in lazy ribbons. You lift it, expecting the plain, bland taste of warm dairy. But this is Victorian London, and nothing is ever that simple. A dash of nutmeg swirls on top. Sometimes cinnamon, sometimes a cheeky pinch of mustard. Yes, mustard and milk. Don't make that face, you sip anyway. The Victorians adored their hot milk as a cure for sleeplessness. It was the bedtime drink of choice for children and adults alike, praised in medical handbooks and household guides. The logic seemed simple. Warm liquid would soothe the nerves and fill the stomach just enough to bring drowsiness. A doctor in 1854 even declared it the most innocent of all-night drafts. Innocent, yes, but dull and less spiced, so families got creative. Nutmeg was popular, believed to relax the mind. Cinnamon added a warming note. Mustard? That one is harder to explain. Some thought its sharpness diverted nervous energy, which is a fancy way of saying they hoped a strange taste would tire the brain out of puzzling over it. You cradle your mug, feeling the heat seep through the metal, the fire crackles, shadows flicker, and for a moment you can almost believe in the gentle promise of sleep. Across London, households were doing the same, factory workers sipping spiced milk after late shifts, mothers preparing it for fretful children, clerks pouring it into chipped cups before trudging to narrow beds. It was cheap, accessible, and at the very least, a comforting ritual. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Some critics sniffed that hot milk caused indigestion, which in turn ruined sleep. One cannot digest cow in the night, you scoffed a satirical pamphlet. Historians still argue whether the benefit came from the milk itself or from the ritual of drinking something warm and familiar in the quiet hours. Perhaps it was a placebo, but even placebos have power when your eyelids are heavy. There's a quirky tidbit here too. A few households experimented with adding onions to warm milk. Yes, onions. The smell alone could clear a room faster than any laudanum overdose. Yet some Victorians swore it worked, claiming the pungent fumes slowed the body into drowsiness. You try to imagine sipping that before bed, hot, milky onion tea, and decide maybe insomnia isn't so bad after all. Picture yourself sitting by the hearth, a thick blanket around your shoulders, the gas light dimmed. You sip nutmeg spiced milk, the taste clinging to your tongue, and listen to the faint hum of the city outside, the muffled cries of vendors, the rattle of a distant carriage, the occasional bark of a dog, all softened by the insulating warmth of the drink. Your body warms, your mind slows. Whether or not the cure is scientifically sound, the ritual feels like a lullaby in liquid form. A joke slips in here. Perhaps the real cure wasn't the milk at all, but sheer boredom. Drink something bland enough, and your body decides unconsciousness is preferable. After all, you can't argue with the results. Even now, the combination of warm milk, dim light, and gentle monotony has you stifling a yawn. So you finish the mug, set it on the hearth, and lie back. Was it the milk, the nutmeg, or just exhaustion finally winning? Hard to say, but as your eyes close, you realize the simple homely cure. No jars, no dangerous tinctures, no pomp, might be the most enduring of them all. You shuffle onward, past the kitchens and apothecaries, into a cramped parlor filled with the oddest contraptions you've seen so far. Wires snake across the floor, glass tubes hum faintly, and a brass dial ticks like an impatient clock. A man in a waistcoat beams proudly as he gestures toward his latest invention, the electric sleep inducer. You sit, slightly wary, as he attaches two small electrodes to your temples. A low buzz trembles through your skull, not painful but strange, like a bee hovering just under your skin. The promise that this gentle current will soothe your brain into slumber. In the mid-19th century, electricity was the cutting-edge obsession. It powered experiments, dazzled audiences, and promised cures for every human ailment. Insomnia was no exception. Advertisements for electrical sleep machines appeared in London's newspapers, each boasting miraculous effects. The logic was simple, or at least it sounded simple. If nerves were like wires, then electricity could reset them. In theory, a quick zap might settle your restlessness. In practice, it probably left you wide-eyed, tingling, and wondering whether your hair had just stood on end. Still, some Victorians swore by it. One account described a patient lulled into the most peaceful rest after a 20-minute session. Another admitted he felt nothing at all, except for the mild embarrassment of looking like a lightning rod. Historians still argue whether these devices had any effect beyond suggestion. Were they precursors to modern electrotherapy, or simply clever scams dressed up with sparks and brass knobs? You glance around the parlor, noting the mix of fascination and fear in the faces of fellow insomniacs. A factory worker rubs his arms where wires had been attached. A fashionable lady fans herself nervously, her curls frizzing slightly from the static. The inventor, of course, beams with confidence, declaring his machine to be the future of peaceful nights. You wonder if he sleeps well himself, or if he spends every evening tweaking dials in the hope of perfecting his miracle cure. There's something oddly comforting about the spectacle. Electricity was mysterious, invisible, yet tangible in its jolts. To a weary Victorian, that mystery might have been part of the cure. Believing you'd been touched by the power of progress could itself coax the body toward calm. Modern readers might laugh, but even today, Sleep clinics experiment with gentle electrical currents to reset brain rhythms. Perhaps those humming machines weren't entirely ridiculous after all. As you sit there, electrodes buzzing softly, you find your eyelids fluttering. Maybe it's the hum, maybe it's the placebo, maybe it's sheer fatigue catching up. A cheeky thought slips in. Nothing says sweet dreams quite like being gently electrocuted by a man in a bow tie. Yet you admit as you sink into a faintly drowsy haze that there are worse ways to chase sleep. At least this one doesn't involve onions in your milk. The inventor switches off the device, unclips the wires, and pats you on the shoulder. You'll sleep like a babe tonight, he promises. You nod, half convinced, half amused. The truth is, whether or not the electricity worked, the ritual gave you hope. And hope in Victorian London was as potent as any drug. You leave the parlor of wires behind and follow the smell of malt drifting from a nearby tavern. It's late, yet the doors are still open, lanterns swaying in the night breeze. You step inside where tankards clink and the air is thick with hops, smoke, and the faint tang of sweat. At first it feels wrong to come here in search of sleep, but then again, this is Victorian London, and beer was once considered a bedtime remedy. You order a pint of porter, dark and heavy, sometimes nicknamed liquid bread. Doctors of the day often prescribed small amounts of alcohol to treat sleeplessness. Beer, porter, or even stout was said to calm nerves, warm the body, and send you gently toward dreams. A medical handbook from the 1860s described porter as soothing to delicate constitutions when taken before retiring. You lift your tankard, sip, and feel the warmth spread through your chest. Perhaps they were onto something, or perhaps this is just the universal effect of beer at midnight. There's a curious paradox here. Victorians condemned drunkenness as immoral, yet many quietly endorsed alcohol as a medicinal aid. The trick, they insisted, was moderation, a single pint to settle the stomach. 2 or 3? Well, that was simply asking for trouble. Historians still argue whether this advice truly helped insomniacs, or if it merely masked exhaustion until dawn's light came creeping in. After all, alcohol might knock you out, but it rarely lets you stay asleep peacefully. You glance around the tavern. A dock worker snores already in his chair, his empty mug beside him. A clerk rubs his eyes, murmuring that just one pint clears the buzzing thoughts of ledgers and debts. In the corner, a woman with tired eyes sips slowly, perhaps less for sleep and more for a brief escape. Each of them has their own ritual, their own justification. And then there's the quirky detail. Some Victorians actually recommended beer baths. Imagine lowering yourself into a tub filled with warm ale, letting the yeasty aroma soak into your skin. Supposedly, the body absorbed mildly soporific elements this way. You wrinkle your nose at the thought. Falling asleep smelling like a brewery doesn't sound very restful, though perhaps the fleas kept at bay appreciated the sacrifice. You take another sip, the porter rich and bitter, almost chocolatey. The tavern grows quieter as patrons shuffle out into the fog, leaving behind a warm hush. You imagine finishing your pint, pulling your coat tighter, and heading homeward through empty streets. Perhaps you'll fall asleep as soon as your head touches the pillow. Or perhaps you'll toss and turn, your body punishing you for trusting barley to do the job of proper rest. Either way, the experiment has been made. The truth is, alcohol as a cure for insomnia was, and still is, both loved and loathed. To some Victorians, it was a comfort, as reliable as a feather bed. To others, it was a trap, blurring the line between cure and vice. You tilt back the last swallow, place the tankard down with a soft thud, and decide that, for tonight at least, beer has done its duty. You'll worry about the debate tomorrow. For now, your eyes are heavier, and that's all you asked for. You stagger out of the tavern, the taste of porter still lingering, and make your way toward a boarding house on a narrow London lane. Inside, you're shown to a bedroom where the true battlefield of Victorian sleep awaited, the bed itself. You glance down at the mattress, sagging slightly, and wonder if it will cradle you into dreams or keep you restless until dawn. In the 19th century, bed debates could get surprisingly heated. Feather beds, horsehair mattresses, even straw, each claimed loyal defenders who insisted their choice was the secret to sound slumber. You press your hand into a feather bed first, sinking as though into a cloud. Warm, soft, luxurious, surely this must be the ultimate cure for insomnia. Yet Victorian doctors warned that feather beds overheated the blood, trapping heat and making sleepers sluggish. Some even argued that the softness weakened the spine, which, if true, would make every nap a minor medical hazard. Still, Many households treasured feather beds as status symbols. If you were sleeping on feathers, you weren't just dozing, you were succeeding. Next, you try horsehair. The mattress feels firmer, springier, and far less inviting. Yet advocates swore this firmness supported the body and allowed cooler airflow. A pamphlet from the 1870s even described horsehair mattresses as promoting vigor by denying indulgence. You stretch out, imagining you're on a bed of wiry broom bristles, and wonder if vigor is really worth it. Historians still argue whether Victorians genuinely believed horsehair cured sleeplessness, or if it was just a convenient way to sell the cheaper, less cozy option to penny-pinching families. Of course, straw was still common too. Fresh straw stuffed into ticking provided a simple, rustic bed. The benefit? You could replace it easily when it became flat or smelly. The downside? Mice. Picture yourself rolling over at midnight only to hear a tiny squeak from beneath your pillow. Not exactly restful. And then came the pillows. Lavender sachets tucked inside, hops sewn into seams, even wool pads sprinkled with vinegar. Each choice reflected not just comfort, but belief. To the Victorians, sleep was a moral duty, and the materials of your bed were part of that moral fabric. A feather bed might signal indulgence. A firm horsehair mattress might proclaim discipline, and you, poor insomniac, were caught between the two. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some households rotated between beds depending on the season, feather beds in winter, horsehair in summer. Imagine lugging one mattress up to the attic while dragging the other down narrow stairs, all in the name of sleep science. You can't help but smirk at the thought. Clearly, Victorian fitness programs were built into bedtime. As you lie back now, the horsehair poking gently at your ribs, you realize the debate was never truly about mattresses. It was about control, about the hope that choosing the right bed could conquer the chaos of sleeplessness. Whether or not it worked, the argument itself gave people something to cling to in the dark. You sigh, tug the blanket closer, and close your eyes. Perhaps this time, whether by feathers, horsehair, or straw, you'll finally drift away. You wake before dawn, having wrestled with both feather and horsehair, and decide to wander the streets once more. London is quieter now, mist curling through alleyways, but it isn't silent. As you walk, you hear it, the rhythmic calls of street vendors echoing through the fog. Hot pies, one cries, eels alive, another sings. The sound drifts up and down the lanes, part marketplace, part lullaby. Strange as it seems, some Victorians believed these cries could actually help them fall asleep. Imagine lying in a narrow garret, shutters open, listening to the faint shouts carry on the night air. A costermonger calling for apples, a milkmaid's cart creaking past, even the watchman striking his staff at the hour. To one person, this was a nuisance. To another, it was reassurance, proof that life went on outside, steady and dependable. The cries became a kind of background hum, no different from the white noise machines you might use today. Historians still argue whether Londoners genuinely found comfort in this racket, or if they were simply resigned to it and rebranded annoyance as remedy. You pause beneath a lamppost, the glow haloed in mist, and listen more carefully. The cadence of the cries is almost musical, rising and falling with an odd rhythm. Some Victorians even described them as urban lullabies, a reminder that you weren't alone in your insomnia. If others were out there working, selling, trudging, then perhaps your wakefulness wasn't so unusual. You were part of a nocturnal community bound together by sleeplessness and shouted fish prices. There's a quirky tidbit worth noting. Certain vendors deliberately sang off-key, hoping their unusual voices would stand out. Imagine a weary Londoner drifting towards sleep only to be jolted awake by a voice bellowing, "Buy my hot mackerel," in what could only be described as aggressively nasal. Some claimed this kept them awake, while others swore the absurdity made them laugh just enough to relax into slumber. You stroll on, the fog wrapping you like a blanket. The cries fade and swell, distant and near, weaving through the city like a patchwork song. You realize that what mattered wasn't the sound itself, but the familiarity. Routine noises, vendors, watchmen, carriage wheels, told Victorians that the world was still turning, safe and predictable. For the sleepless, predictability was soothing. Of course, not everyone agreed. Doctors warned that constant urban disturbance was ruining Londoners' health. Pamphlets urged stricter noise laws, yet others defended the street cries, insisting they were part of the city's very soul. To erase them, they argued, would be to erase London itself. You smile at the thought, insomnia cured by civic pride. Who knew? Now, as you lean against the railing of a bridge, the faint sound of hot muffins echoes once more. The water of the Thames reflects the first streaks of dawn. Your eyes are heavy, your body swaying with fatigue. Maybe it isn't the tea or the laudanum or the bed that finally softens you into drowsiness. Maybe it's just the chorus of London crying you to sleep in its own peculiar way. You duck into another shop, this one brighter than the rest, its shelves lined with tins, bottles, and boxes shouting promises in ornate lettering. "Sweet sleep guaranteed," reads one. "Restful nights in a single dose," boasts another. Welcome to the world of Victorian patent medicines, where insomnia was just another sales opportunity, and packaging mattered almost as much as contents. You pick up a small tin of powdered night draft. The label shows a moon with sleepy eyelids, and below it, instructions: 1 teaspoon stirred into warm water at bedtime. You imagine following the directions faithfully, stirring the bitter dust until it dissolved. What's inside? Well, that's the real mystery. Sometimes these powders contained magnesium salts, which could calm the stomach. Other times they included bromides, mild sedatives by modern standards, but more often than not, they carried stronger, less predictable ingredients: alcohol, opium derivatives, even chloroform in syrup form. Sweet dreams, indeed. The packaging was a cure in itself. Ornate fonts, royal endorsements, real or invented, and dramatic claims turned ordinary powders into marvels of science. Some boxes insisted their contents had been tested by leading physicians, though those physicians were rarely named. Others boasted of being imported from distant lands, India, the Caribbean, Egypt, as if a foreign origin alone made them more potent. You can almost hear the shopkeeper rehearsing his pitch. "Sleep like the pharaohs, sir, with just 2 spoonfuls." A quirky tidbit: many of these patent medicines included cocaine in small amounts. Yes, cocaine. Imagine dosing yourself at midnight with a syrup that promised peaceful rest, only to spend the next 3 hours cleaning your apartment, alphabetizing your Dickens novels, and considering new business ventures. Historians still argue whether sellers knew these substances worsened insomnia, or whether they genuinely believed stimulation could somehow lead to later exhaustion. You turn another bottle in your hand. The glass is green, the label gold, and the name melodious: Morpheus Elixir. You almost laugh. No subtlety here. The god of dreams himself bottled for your convenience. Would it work? Possibly. Would it be addictive? Almost certainly. The Victorians lived in an age of faith and progress, and every new compound was hailed as a marvel. Few stopped to question long-term effects until it was too late. The shop around you buzzes with customers. A weary mother clutching her baby buys a jar of soothing syrup. A gentleman with bloodshot eyes pockets Sleep Tonic No. 7. A young clerk nervously asks the shopkeeper whether the powders are suitable for frequent use. The shopkeeper smiles, nods, and makes the sale. Business thrives on desperation, and insomnia was as good a market as any. You imagine yourself finally trying one of these powders. The water in your glass clouds as it dissolves, and you swallow, grimacing at the chalky taste. Do you fall asleep quickly, lulled by bromides or opiates? Or do you lie awake, your heart racing from hidden stimulants? That was the gamble every Victorian insomniac faced. Relief was never guaranteed, but hope was always on the shelf. As you step back into the foggy street, you tuck the tin into your pocket, unsure whether you've just purchased a cure, a curse, or simply a very expensive placebo. Either way, the ritual is part of the night's story. Another reminder that sleeplessness has always been a marketplace waiting to be tapped. You wander deeper into the city and hear a murmur of excitement outside a small theater. Posters plastered across the walls promise marvelous rest through mesmerism, and Dr. Featherstone's clockwork hypnosis. Intrigued, you slip inside, where rows of weary Londoners sit fanning themselves, eyes fixed on a man in a tailored coat. In his hand swings a polished brass pendulum, ticking gently like a pocket watch against the hush of the audience. Tonight, insomnia is not treated with tea or tonic, but with suggestion. Hypnosis, or mesmerism as it was often called, was wildly fashionable in Victorian London. Doctors, stage performers, and self-styled professors of sleep claimed they could cure restlessness by lulling patients into trance states. You sit near the front as the mesmerist speaks in a soft, deliberate rhythm. Your eyelids grow heavy, your thoughts grow still. You almost chuckle at the familiarity. Centuries later, the same words fill modern guided sleep apps. Perhaps we haven't changed so much after all. Some Victorians swore these shows worked wonders. Patients reported drifting into peaceful slumber after only a few minutes under the swinging pendulum. Others admitted the effect was less like sleep and more like zoning out during a dull sermon. Historians still argue whether mesmerism truly induced rest or if it was simply a mix of boredom, peer pressure, and the soothing cadence of a practiced voice. You watch as a woman in the crowd slumps forward, breathing slow and deep. The mesmerist nods triumphantly. Another man begins snoring loudly, though whether from trance or sheer exhaustion is anyone's guess. A few skeptics whisper at the back, insisting it's all theater. Yet even the skeptics stay, secretly hoping to be proven wrong. After all, when you're desperate for sleep, even theatrics are worth a try. The stage props are curious too. A contraption of gears and weights ticks steadily, designed to keep a pendulum swinging for hours. One mesmerist even claimed his clockwork hypnotic device could cure entire neighborhoods if left running long enough. Imagine London blanketed by the soft rhythm of ticking brass, every resident lulled into synchronized dreams. Quirky, yes, but oddly appealing, especially if you spent the last week staring at cracked plaster ceilings. A joke crosses your mind. Perhaps insomnia cures don't need science, just better stage lighting and a convincing narrator. If so, I'd be out of a job. Still, as you sit in the theater, eyes following the pendulum, you notice your own breathing slowing. The combination of dim gaslight, rhythmic motion, and droning voice begins to blur the edges of thought. For a fleeting moment, you could swear you're slipping into the very trance promised on the poster. The show ends with polite applause. Some leave convinced, others roll their eyes, but all admit to feeling at least a little calmer. As you step back into the misty street, you realize hypnosis wasn't just performance, it was ritual, a shared belief that words and motion could summon rest. Whether science or spectacle, it offered what every sleepless Victorian craved, the hope of surrendering finally to sleep. You leave the theater with the echo of that swinging pendulum still tugging at your mind, and soon you find yourself following the hiss of water pipes to a public bathhouse. Inside, lanterns glow against tile walls, and the air smells faintly of soap and coal gas. Here, another Victorian cure for insomnia awaits. Not a potion, not a pendulum, but a simple soak. Bathing before bed was a surprisingly serious matter. Doctors recommended specific temperatures, warning that too hot or too cold could ruin your chances of rest. Some swore by tepid baths around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which they believed calmed nerves and lowered body heat just enough to coax drowsiness. Others insisted only a scalding bath would do, shocking the body into exhaustion. You imagine yourself lowering gingerly into the water, hissing as heat prickles your skin, then sighing as your muscles melt like wax. Of course, cold baths had their champions too. A handful of physicians argued that plunging into chilly water invigorated the system, which, paradoxically, allowed sleep to follow more naturally. You try to picture it, standing in a cold stone room, teeth chattering as icy water slaps against your shoulders. Sleep? Perhaps, if hypothermia counts. Historians still argue whether Victorians genuinely benefited from cold plunges or whether it was simply bravado disguised as medicine. There's a quirky tidbit worth noting. Some bathhouses offered gaslight bathing. Imagine reclining in a tub while overhead pipes hissed softly, the room illuminated by flickering gas lamps reflected in the rippling surface. Advertisements promised this combination of warmth and glow would induce tranquil slumber. Whether it worked or not, you admit the image has a certain romance. If you ignore the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning, you glance around the bathhouse. A factory worker soaks silently, his head resting against the tile edge. A young woman dips a sponge, carefully wringing water over her shoulders as though washing away the day's tension. An elderly gentleman insists loudly that only cold baths ever work for him, though his shivering suggests otherwise. Everyone has an opinion, everyone clings to their ritual, and you, restless, heavy-eyed, slip deeper into the water. letting the warmth seep into your bones. Your thoughts slow, your body loosens, and for a brief stretch of minutes, you forget the city outside. The ticking clocks, the shouting vendors, the bitter potions, all fade beneath the simple embrace of heat. You chuckle softly. Perhaps all the Victorians really needed was a long soak and fewer arguments about featherbeds. As you climb out, towel rough against your skin, you notice the hush settling over the bathhouse. Patrons wrap themselves in robes, shuffle homeward through misty streets, and hope the lingering warmth will carry them to dreams. Whether or not the science was sound, the ritual of bathing, by gaslight, by tepid or scalding water, offered what every sleepless Londoner craved, the illusion, at least, of control over the night. You return to your lodgings with skin still warm from the bath, and as you step into the bedroom, a gentle fragrance greets you. On the pillow lies a small cloth sachet sewn with lavender sprigs and tucked neatly into the case. Victorian households adored such perfumed pillows, believing that scent itself could soothe restless minds and lead straight into slumber. You lean close, inhale, and the floral sweetness fills your lungs. Whether it works or not, it certainly smells better than valerian tea. Lavender was the star of the show. Apothecaries sold bottles of lavender water, housewives tucked dried blossoms into pillows, and advice columns recommended sprinkling a few drops onto handkerchiefs kept by the bedside. Some guides even suggested soaking bed linens in lavender rinse, ensuring the sleeper was cocooned in aroma from head to toe. Doctors described it as the most innocent of sedatives, gentle enough for children yet strong enough, supposedly, to tame the racing thoughts of adults. Historians still argue whether lavender's reputation was earned through chemistry. It does have mild calming properties, or whether it was the ritual of association, the comfort of a scent linked to quiet nights. But lavender wasn't alone. Rosemary, thyme, and even rose petals were also stuffed into pillows or sachets. Some families experimented with more unusual blends: wormwood for vivid dreams, hops for deeper sleep, violets for cheerful rest. You imagine a Victorian bed like a miniature apothecary, the sleeper practically buried under an herb garden. A quirky tidbit: in one popular household manual, it was suggested that husbands could sweeten their wives' tempers by gifting them perfumed pillows. Apparently, restful sleep was not just health advice, but marital strategy. You lie back on the bed, face pressed against the lavender sachet. The scent lingers, delicate yet persistent, and you begin to feel your breathing slow. Perhaps it's coincidence, perhaps the day's exhaustion, but your eyelids feel heavier than before. Across London, countless others performed the same ritual, placing trust in petals and herbs rather than powders and wires. It was, in its way, a rebellion against harsher remedies, a return to nature simple and fragrant. Of course, critics scoffed. One physician grumbled that perfumed sleep aids are but toys for the fanciful, yet even he admitted that a pleasant-smelling room could hardly harm the patient. And so the sachets remained, tucked under pillows, hidden in sleeves, tied to bedposts. For the weary, even the faintest whiff of comfort was worth clinging to. You smile at the thought. Somewhere in London, someone is drifting off to the smell of hops, another to rosemary, another perhaps to a dubious blend of garlic and mint. Whatever the mix, the principle is the same. Let the nose lead the body into rest. You roll onto your side, lavender brushing against your cheek, and decide that if you must choose between laudanum and flowers, you'll take the flowers every time. The city hums faintly beyond the window, but the fragrance folds around you like a private garden. Whether it truly cures insomnia or not, the comfort is undeniable. You close your eyes, inhale once more, and let the night carry you forward. The lavender sachet still lingers faintly in your nose as you slide a candle closer to the bed, strike a match, and open a book. Reading before sleep was another cherished Victorian remedy, and entire households built their routines around it. You lean back against the headboard, pages rustling softly, while the room flickers in golden light. The idea was simple. Words would quiet the mind, pulling your thoughts away from daily anxieties until your eyelids grew too heavy to turn another page. But what did Victorians read at midnight? Some chose novels, Dickens, Thackeray, or sensation tales borrowed from a circulating library. You can almost see yourself propped up in bed with Bleak House, the sentences long and winding, each paragraph like a gentle lull. Others swore by devotional books, psalms, or sermons so dry that drowsiness seemed guaranteed. One weary Londoner wrote that his best cure for wakefulness was a sermon collection, declaring it a greater aid to sleep than any draught. You chuckle, imagining someone nodding off between admonitions about sin and salvation. There's a quirky tidbit too. Medical guides sometimes warned against exciting literature at bedtime. Sensation novels, ghost stories, or even poetry could overheat the imagination, leaving readers more awake than before. Historians still argue whether these warnings reflected real concern or moral panic about the popularity of serialized fiction. Perhaps both. After all, if you're wide awake at 2 a.m. clutching a ghost tale, it's tempting to blame the book rather than the insomnia. You turn a page, the paper thin and a little rough. The story meanders, descriptions piling gently until your mind begins to wander. Across London, countless others are doing the same. Clerks squinting by candlelight, mothers whisper reading psalms, students slogging through Latin texts they secretly hope will bore them into oblivion. Reading was not just distraction, it was ritual. The sound of a page turning, the rhythm of sentences, the quiet companionship of an author long dead, all these acted like a soft hand guiding you towards sleep. Still, there was danger in the ritual. Candles were prone to tipping, and more than one household fire began with a book forgotten in a drowsy reader's lap. Advice manuals cautioned readers not to continue beyond the second yawn, though who can say how strictly that was followed. Imagine drifting off mid-sentence, book sliding from your fingers, wax dripping dangerously close to the sheets. Sleep arrived, yes, but sometimes with singed curtains. Tonight you read just long enough to feel your focus blur, the sentences stretch, the candle guttering low. A joke slips in here. Perhaps Dickens wrote his novels long enough to function as sleep aids, padding chapters like pillows. Whether or not that was his intent, you admit the tactic is working. You close the book, blow out the candle, and sink deeper into the pillow. Outside, London continues to murmur. But here, within these pages, you've built a small cocoon. Reading may not be a miracle cure, but it has carried countless insomniacs, Victorian and modern alike, halfway to their dreams. You slip your book aside and find your legs restless again. So you step back into the misty streets. The night air is cool, the cobblestones damp, and in the distance you hear the steady tap of a staff. A uniformed night watchman rounds the corner, lantern swinging, boots striking the stones with practiced rhythm. You fall into step behind him, your own pace echoing his, and suddenly you understand why some Victorians swore by a midnight stroll as a cure for insomnia. The watchman's job was simple but constant: patrol the streets, call out the hour, and keep a token eye on mischief. For the sleepless, his presence was oddly reassuring. You picture yourself trailing him past shuttered shops and quiet houses, the repetition of his footsteps becoming a metronome for your own breath. The rhythm lulls you just enough to quiet the buzzing thoughts that haunted your bed. Some doctors even recommended these late walks. A brisk turn through the fog, they claimed, relieved the congested mind and opened the way to rest. Of course, critics countered that wandering streets at night exposed one to drafts, chills, and the occasional pickpocket. Historians still argue whether exercise genuinely calmed insomnia or whether it merely wore down bodies until collapse was inevitable, perhaps both. You glance up at the watchman as he pauses beneath a lamp to adjust his cloak. He nods politely, accustomed to seeing pale-eyed wanderers on his route. In fact, a quirky tidbit emerges here. Some watchmen quietly built reputations as unofficial sleep doctors. Insomniacs would seek them out, following their rounds for half an hour, then heading home lulled by the steady pattern of staff and step. Imagine boasting, "I don't need laudanum, I have Mr. Thompson and his lantern." The streets stretch onward, fog swirling like curtains. The only sounds are the occasional bark of a dog, the distant cry of a vendor still hawking midnight pies, and the watchman's soft chant of the hour, 2 o'clock, and all is well. The words echo, oddly comforting. To hear that all is well was a kind of therapy in itself, a reminder that the world was not collapsing, even if your mind felt it was. You smile faintly at the thought, Perhaps modern insomnia apps owe more to Victorian watchmen than they realize. Replace the staff tap with digital chimes, the chant with a soothing narrator, and the principle is the same: steady rhythm, gentle reassurance, the feeling of safety in the dark. Your legs grow tired, your breathing slows, and when you finally part ways with the watchman, you feel lighter. Sleep may not arrive instantly, but at least your mind has found a quieter tempo. Sometimes, in Victorian London, the cure wasn't in bottles or bed sheets, but in simply walking the night away with company, however unlikely. The night stroll has cooled your skin, but it hasn't entirely hushed your restless mind. You recall whispers of another prescription, one that carried you out of London altogether. In the 19th century, doctors frequently advised their sleepless patients to head for the seaside. Fresh, salty air and the sound of waves were touted as nature's strongest sedatives. So you picture yourself boarding a train, rattling toward Brighton, lungs eager for something cleaner than coal smoke. Seaside cures were fashionable, almost luxurious, especially for the middle and upper classes. Physicians argued that ocean breezes carried ozonic particles that calm the nerves and soothe the brain. You arrive at a Victorian boarding house by the shore, greeted by the briny scent of seaweed and fish, the gulls squawking overhead. It isn't exactly lavender, but it feels healthier than London fog. You loosen your collar, breathe deeply, and hope your doctor's advice proves true. The regimen often included more than breathing. Patients were instructed to walk barefoot along the sand, to take the waters by drinking mineral-laced seawater, a practice you eye with suspicion, and most importantly, to listen. The rhythmic crash of waves was considered the perfect lullaby, steady, repetitive, unthreatening. Historians still argue whether doctors sincerely believed in these benefits or if the seaside prescription was simply a convenient excuse for a holiday. Either way, Victorians embraced it with gusto. You wander the boardwalk, watching children in sailor suits chase kites while their parents recline in striped bathing machines. The air feels alive, invigorating, and you can't help but think your sleep might finally come tonight. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some seaside resorts hired musicians to mimic the sound of waves on evenings when the sea was calm. Imagine drifting off not to real surf, but to a violinist scraping out soothing ocean noises. One wonders how convincing that performance was. Back at the boarding house, you sit by an open window, sea breeze curling the curtains, the salt tingles in your nose, the waves thump like a giant heartbeat. For a moment, the restlessness fades. Compared to valerian teas and electric machines, this cure feels honest, elemental. Of course, not everyone could afford the journey, which meant seaside prescriptions were as much about privilege as medicine. Still, for those who made the trip, the memory of crashing waves often lingered long after they returned to city streets. You lie back in a narrow bed, curtains flapping with each gust of sea air. Outside, the waves roll steady, as if the ocean itself has decided to rock you to sleep. Whether science or suggestion, you finally feel the soft tug of drowsiness. Perhaps the Victorians had it right this time. Sometimes the cure for insomnia was simply a change of scenery and a deeper breath. The sea air clings to you even as you return to the city, but once back in your room, another familiar problem intrudes: the relentless ticking of the clock on the mantel. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Each sound punctuates the silence, drilling into your weary mind. Victorians were obsessed with clocks, and for the sleepless, these machines could be both friend and foe. Tonight, you lie in bed listening, trying to decide whether the clock is keeping you awake or lulling you into rest. For some Londoners, a steady tick was hypnotic. Medical guides recommended placing a small timepiece by the bedside, letting its rhythm act as a metronome for breathing. Align the lungs to the beat, one doctor advised, and slumber shall follow as naturally as the tide. You try it. Inhale on the tick, exhale on the talk. The rhythm is oddly soothing, like footsteps of the night watchman condensed into brass gears. But others despised the sound, too sharp, too insistent, a constant reminder of minutes slipping by without sleep. Satirical newspapers joked about the tyranny of the tick, mocking insomniacs who smashed their clocks in midnight fury. Historians still argue whether the spread of cheap, mass-produced timepieces actually worsened insomnia, making people more anxious about the hours they were losing. Before clocks were common, you might simply not have known how long you'd been awake. Ignorance in that sense was bliss. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some Victorians tried muffling clocks by wrapping them in cloth, hoping to soften the sound into a faint heartbeat. Others went further, placing them in boxes under the bed, turning bedtime into a mild treasure hunt if you needed the time later. One eccentric pamphlet even suggested hanging clocks in chimneys to diffuse the ticking. Imagine trying to explain that when the chimney sweep came round. As you lie there, half annoyed, half soothed, you realize the clock is more than an object. It's a metaphor for control. For Victorians, mastering time was a point of pride. Trains ran on schedules, factories on shifts, households on routines. Sleep, too, was expected to obey the tick of the clock. Yet the body rarely complies so neatly. That mismatch between human rest and mechanical order may have fueled more insomnia than the clock ever cured. You close your eyes again, letting the ticking fade into background noise. You imagine it as a lullaby of sorts, steady and predictable. The clock does not care whether you sleep, it will tick on regardless. Strangely, that indifference is calming. Perhaps tonight you'll let the gears keep watch while you drift into whatever dreams Victorian London still owes you. The ticking clock fades into the background, but another battlefield remains, the bedroom itself. You shiver beneath thin sheets, then kick them off, then pull them back again. Victorians obsessed over the perfect sleeping environment, convinced that temperature, drafts, and even curtain choice determined whether you would rest or lie awake till dawn. Tonight, you experiment along with them, tugging at drapes and prodding at coal fires in search of comfort. Cold bedrooms were often praised. Medical writers claimed that fresh, chilly air invigorated the lungs and promoted deeper slumber. Better to breathe a draft than a fever, one guide advised, urging readers to crack windows even in winter. You picture yourself sliding open a sash, icy London fog curling in, and wonder whether you're about to cure insomnia or catch pneumonia. Some Victorians swore they slept best when breath hung visible in the dark. Others argued for the opposite: warmth, heavy curtains, and roaring fires. To them, cold air was poison, creeping into bones and stirring nightmares. A tightly sealed room with thick drapery promised coziness, if not exactly fresh oxygen. You tug the curtains shut, feel the heat rise, and quickly realize why critics warned about stifling chambers. Historians still argue whether draft paranoia was medical truth or simply another Victorian fixation with control. Here's a quirky tidbit: some households believed in deliberately weighting the sleeper. Blankets were piled high, not one or two, but 4 or 5, creating a pressure that forced the body into stillness. Sound familiar? Yes, the Victorians invented weighted blankets long before modern therapists marketed them. The difference? Instead of sleek duvets, you were pinned beneath layers of wool, flannel, and perhaps even a heavy quilt stitched by your grandmother. If you moved at all, it was only because you were strong enough to wrestle free. You experiment: window cracked slightly, curtains drawn tight, a blanket stack pressing your chest like a polite elephant. The contrast is odd: chilly drafts brushing your face while your body swelters beneath fabric. Still, your muscles slacken and you feel the strange comfort Victorians described. Maybe the trick wasn't the temperature at all, but the sheer ritual of fussing, adjusting curtains, debating fires, arranging layers until fatigue won out. A joke slips in. Perhaps insomnia was cured not by science, but by sheer exhaustion after wrestling with too many blankets. You chuckle softly under the pile, realizing the cure sometimes lay in the comedy of the attempt. The room settles into silence, coal fire crackling faintly. You breathe deep, the mingled scents of smoke and damp wool surrounding you. Outside, fog curls past the window, indifferent to your struggles. Inside, you cling to the hope that somewhere between cold drafts and heavy curtains, the elusive balance of Victorian sleep might finally appear. You lie pinned beneath your mountain of blankets, half asleep, when a faint sound drifts through the window, soft, melodic, just above the hush of the city. Somewhere nearby, a piano plays a slow nocturne. The notes float through the fog like lanterns, and you realize another Victorian cure has arrived: music. For restless Londoners, music was more than entertainment, it was medicine. Doctors recommended gentle melodies to soothe agitation, and families often gathered around pianos after supper, not only for amusement but in hopes of encouraging a restful night. You picture yourself seated beside the instrument, candlelight flickering across polished wood, while a sibling or friend picks out tunes in the half-dark. Chopin was popular, but so were sentimental ballads, slow waltzes, and even lullabies borrowed from nursery books. The theory was simple: rhythm and repetition quieted the mind. Historians still argue whether this was genuine medical insight or just an excuse to justify hiring piano teachers. Yet the principle has endured. Today's playlists of relaxing sleep music aren't far removed from Victorian nocturnes. Music wasn't limited to parlors. Street barrel organs cranked out tunes well into the night, sometimes irritating, sometimes oddly calming. Imagine lying in bed as a faint melody drifts up from the cobblestones below, the same notes repeating again and again until boredom slides into drowsiness. There's a quirky tidbit here. One London landlord actually hired a barrel organist to play near his lodging house specifically to lull tenants into sleep. Reviews were mixed. Half the boarders loved it, half threatened to smash the organ. Not every choice of music was ideal. A brassy march or lively jig could backfire spectacularly, leaving the insomniac tapping toes instead of closing eyes. Advice manuals recommended no tunes with vigor after dusk, which rules out half the Victorian repertoire. Instead, the soft, repetitive strains of hymnals or gentle folk songs were safest. You imagine humming along, your voice mingling with the piano, the vibration in your chest loosening tension one note at a time. And then there were mechanical solutions. Music boxes, tiny gears winding down slowly, releasing tinkling lullabies. The charm was as much in the mechanism as the sound. Watching the cylinder spin, listening as the melody slowed and faltered, was like watching time itself nod off. One joke surfaces here. You realize you've paid good money to be serenaded by what sounds like a tin can full of spoons, and yet you find it oddly effective. As the piano across the street finishes its nocturne, the final chord fading into fog, you sink deeper beneath your blankets. Whether the Victorians truly found medical value in music or simply comfort, the effect is undeniable. The rhythm steadies your breathing, the melodies occupy your wandering mind, and silence returns not as absence but as peace. You close your eyes, grateful for the lull of a city that occasionally remembered to sing its insomniacs to sleep. The piano's notes fade, leaving your room wrapped in silence once more. You roll onto your side, and something soft brushes against your cheek. It isn't another lavender sachet, it's fur. A cat, purring steadily, has curled up beside you. Victorians often turned to animals as sleep remedies, believing their warmth, rhythm, and quiet companionship could hush a restless mind. You stroke the cat's back, feeling the vibration in your fingertips, and for a moment your body relaxes more than any potion or pillow ever managed. Cats were considered particularly effective. Their steady purrs were thought to calm nerves, while their warmth kept feet cozy in drafty rooms. Some manuals even suggested placing a cat directly on the chest to regulate breathing. You can imagine the scenario, drifting toward sleep while pinned beneath 10 pounds of determined feline. Historians still argue whether Victorians truly saw cats as medical aids, or if this was simply an excuse for indulging affection toward household pets. Either way, it worked often enough to earn a place in the lore of forgotten cures. Other creatures joined the list. Canaries in cages were recommended, their gentle nighttime rustlings thought to reassure lonely sleepers. Dogs, too, were praised for their loyalty, though advice columns cautioned against letting them share the bed. Fleas were considered less curative. And then there's the quirky tidbit. One eccentric physician genuinely suggested keeping a donkey nearby, claiming its placid presence soothed anxious patients. Imagine trying to drift off with a braying animal in the courtyard. Perhaps soothing was not the right word. You chuckle softly as the cat stretches, claws kneading your blanket. The warmth of its body is steady, the rhythm of its purr hypnotic. Compared to laudanum or electrical shocks, this cure feels delightfully sane. Modern science even suggests the sound frequency of a cat's purr promotes relaxation, though Victorians could only describe it as the hum of contentment. In poorer quarters, animals served a more practical role. Families in unheated rooms sometimes kept chickens or rabbits indoors, not just for food but for warmth. A child drifting off beside a crate of drowsy hens may not have felt glamorous, but it offered companionship and a strange sort of comfort. Sleep comes easier, after all, when you aren't alone in the dark. You close your eyes, the purr resonating against your chest like a lullaby stitched by nature itself. The city hum fades, the blanket's weight settles, and for the first time in hours, you feel your body truly loosen. A joke slips in. Perhaps the best Victorian sleep aid was simply having a cat that didn't knock over the oil lamp at 3 a.m. As you drift between wake and dream, you realize the cure here isn't just warmth or vibration, it's trust. the reassurance that another living creature keeps watch while you surrender. Whether feathered, furred, or brain in a stable outside, Victorians found comfort in companionship. And so, it seems, do you. The cat eventually pads off, leaving your feet chilly again. You sigh, tug the blanket higher, and then recall another Victorian trick. Warmth not from animals or endless layers of wool, but from simple objects heated by fire. You reach toward the hearth where a brick, wrapped in flannel, radiates a gentle glow of heat. Victorians adored such comforts, believing warm bricks and clever fabric tricks could ease both shivers and sleeplessness. Before electric blankets or rubber hot water bottles, bricks were the tool of choice. Heated in the oven or beside the coals, then wrapped in cloth to prevent burns, they were tucked into beds to warm sheets and soothe nerves. Imagine sliding under cold linen in a drafty London bedroom, only to find a cozy brick nestled at your feet. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Historians still argue whether the real cure came from warmth itself or simply from the comforting ritual of preparing the brick. Either way, it made nights far more bearable. Flannel, too, played its role. Victorians trusted fabric almost as much as medicine. Flannel nightshirts, flannel sheets, flannel bed socks, each promised to trap body heat and regulate the humors. Some households went further, sewing pockets into flannel layers to hold herbs or even small heated stones. You picture yourself bundled up like a walking quilt, equal parts patient and experiment. A quirky tidbit emerges here. Some advertisements marketed flannel belts worn around the stomach at night to prevent indigestion and encourage sleep. Essentially, they were just long strips of wool, but sellers swore they were medical marvels. One pamphlet even claimed the belt could quiet the dreams of anxious clerks, though you suspect clerks might have been more anxious about unpaid bills than cold stomachs. You test the trick yourself, pressing the warm brick against your toes. The heat spreads slowly, easing tension in your legs. Paired with the heavy flannel nightshirt someone insisted you wear, the effect is almost hypnotic. Outside, London fog curls along the window ledge, but here, inside, you're cocooned. The contrast between icy air and steady warmth feels strangely soothing. Doctors of the time explained the benefit in practical terms. Warmth encouraged circulation, calmed shivering muscles, and allowed the body to rest without agitation, yet others dismissed it as mere indulgence. After all, not every family had the time or coal to heat bricks nightly. Still, for those who did, the comfort was hard to deny. You chuckle softly, imagining a Victorian household lined with bricks warming by the fire like pastries, each destined for a bed. It may not have been glamorous, but it was ingenious. Compared to swallowing laudanum or sitting under buzzing wires, a hot brick feels like the most reasonable cure so far. You nestle back, brick tucked close, flannel wrapped tight. The room grows quieter, the warmth steadier, and for a moment you forget the city beyond the window. Perhaps the Victorians had stumbled onto something simple, that sometimes all a sleepless night requires is warmth, patience, and the hum of coal still glowing in the hearth. The brick has cooled, its heat fading into the sheets, and you find yourself staring at the ceiling once more. But instead of another tonic or gadget, the Victorians sometimes turned to words. Not from novels this time, but from pulpits. Midnight sermons and moral lectures were often prescribed as remedies for insomnia, based on the idea that a troubled conscience made for a troubled night. If your soul was unsettled, so too would your sleep be. You imagine yourself seated in a narrow pew, gas lamps flickering overhead, listening as a clergyman drones softly about temperance and virtue. His voice rises and falls in a steady rhythm, not unlike the pendulum of a mesmerist. Some found this deeply soothing. A mind at peace with God, one pamphlet declared, slumbers as sweetly as a child. You glance around at your fellow congregants, half nodding in agreement, half nodding from drowsiness. The logic was moral as much as medical. Sleeplessness was sometimes interpreted as a symptom of guilt, anxiety over sinful living, or failure to keep proper discipline. Cure the conscience, they said, and you cure the insomnia. Historians still argue whether sermons truly ease sleeplessness or whether they simply provided a socially acceptable excuse for dozing in church. After all, who could scold you for falling asleep if it was framed as divine healing? There's a quirky tidbit here. Some ministers reportedly tailored their late-night talks to be deliberately dull, believing monotony itself was medicinal. Imagine a clergyman boasting afterward that he'd put the entire congregation to bed by 10:30. One can't help but picture the sermon less as spiritual guidance and more as a Victorian white noise machine. At home, the principle continued. Advice books urged readers to recite psalms or moral aphorisms when tossing in bed. The repetitive cadence was supposed to calm the mind, while the content reassured the conscience. You try it now, whispering a phrase into the dimness, repeating until the syllables blur into sound. It works much like counting sheep, though with a bit more judgment attached. A joke slips in as yo, yawn. Perhaps the true miracle of Victorian religion wasn't saving souls, but finally letting parishioners catch a decent nap. Still, there's comfort in the ritual, even if the cure is less divine intervention and more strategic boredom. You lie back, the echoes of a phantom sermon humming in your ears. Whether or not morality has soothed your nerves, the steady cadence of words has done its job. Your body loosens, your eyes grow heavier, and for a moment you feel absolved, not just of sin, but of another long, restless night. The phantom sermon fades, and yet your thoughts stir again. Sleep hovers close, then slips away, leaving you restless. In Victorian London, such wakefulness often gave rise to eerie tales, stories of those who didn't just lie awake but rose from bed and wandered. Sleepwalking fascinated and unsettled the age, and for insomniacs it became both fear and cure. After all, if you couldn't sleep, perhaps your body might still pretend by pacing unconsciously through the night. You picture yourself rising from bed in a trance, feet bare against cold floorboards, drifting toward the door without memory. The city's foggy lanes stretch ahead, and passers-by whisper about the walking dreamers who haunt the night. Some Victorians believed sleepwalking was a symptom of nervous disorders, others that it revealed hidden genius. Historians still argue whether it was treated as illness, spectacle, or simply one more oddity in a city brimming with strangeness. Doctors recommended curious remedies. One advised placing buckets of water by the bedside, reasoning that cold shock would wake the wanderer before mischief began. Another insisted on tying the sleeper's ankle with string connected to a bell, a DIY alarm system meant to rattle the whole household awake. A quirky tidbit: one London landlord required his boarders to sign agreements not to walk and sleep, claiming the risk to property and reputation was too great. Imagine explaining that clause when renting a room. For insomniacs, tales of sleepwalking were double-edged. Some envied the walkers, believing they found unconscious rest their own bodies refused. Others feared they too might rise in trance and wake on a rooftop, bewildered at dawn. The tension only fueled anxieties, turning sleepless nights into watchful vigils against their own wandering limbs. You chuckle softly, imagining Victorian households booby-trapped with bells, buckets, and suspicious cats stationed at doorways. Perhaps the cure was less about prevention than about exhausting oneself in the setup. After half an hour of rigging alarms, anyone would be ready to collapse. Tonight, you stay firmly in bed, though the thought lingers. Is sleepwalking a curse, a hidden release, or just another story spun to explain the unexplainable? You don't know. What you do know is that the mystery itself, repeated in hushed tones across drawing rooms and newspapers, gave Victorian London one more way to talk about sleeplessness without admitting how common it really was. You pull the blanket tighter, ears alert to every creak of the floorboards. Perhaps it's just the house settling. Or perhaps, in some other room, a sleeper has already risen, drifting like a ghost through the gas-lit fog. The whispers of sleepwalkers fade, but another set of footsteps enters the Victorian insomnia story. This time, delicate slippers pacing parlors and boudoirs. Sleeplessness among women was a constant topic in medical texts, often diagnosed under the umbrella of nervous disorders. You picture a young woman reclining on a fainting couch, eyes heavy with exhaustion, while a physician strokes his beard and declares her condition to be both mysterious and feminine. Victorian doctors insisted that women's insomnia was different from men's. Where a sleepless clerk was described as overworked, a sleepless woman was often labeled hysterical, fragile, or morally unsettled. Prescriptions ranged from mild tonics to full regimens of bed rest, sometimes lasting weeks. You imagine lying on that couch, forbidden to leave the room, as servants fuss with curtains and relatives whisper about your nerves. It's enough to make anyone anxious, ironically defeating the purpose. Fainting couches themselves became part of the cure. These low, cushioned sofas allowed women to recline gracefully without fully undressing, supposedly promoting rest whenever weariness struck. Doctors recommended short naps of composure throughout the day, believing they would prevent nighttime wakefulness. Historians still argue whether this advice reflected genuine care or simply social constraints, keeping women confined under the guise of medicine. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some physicians prescribed nightly silence for female patients, ordering husbands not to disturb their wives with conversation after dusk. Imagine the household relief or frustration such advice provoked. One wonders whether the cure was for insomnia or for marital squabbles. Other treatments leaned toward the absurd. Opiate syrups were prescribed liberally, sometimes alongside restoring tonics laced with alcohol. Patients might sleep, yes, but at the cost of dependency. A gentler option was embroidery, promoted as a calming pre-sleep activity. You picture a woman stitching by lamplight, eyelids drooping as each neat cross slows. You smile wryly at the double standard. Men's sleeplessness was treated as evidence of ambition. Women's was painted as weakness. Yet in practice, the nightly pacing, the bitter tonics, the longing for silence, these experiences were strikingly similar. Sleeplessness made no distinction, even if society did. You recline on the imaginary fainting couch now, the velvet cool beneath your fingertips, the room dim. Whether the diagnosis is nerves or simply life, the cure feels less medical than theatrical. Still, if the posture, the embroidery, or even the quiet helps ease one woman into sleep, perhaps the fainting couch deserves its odd reputation after all. The fainting couch fades from view, and you wander into a different kind of chamber, one thick with cigar smoke, leather armchairs, and the low murmur of voices. Welcome to a Victorian gentleman's club at midnight, where insomnia was debated as eagerly as politics or horse races. You ease into a seat, a glass of brandy in hand, and listen as the city's sleepless elite swap theories about why they cannot rest. Here, insomnia became almost fashionable. To confess sleeplessness was to imply you were busy, important, your mind too burdened with affairs of empire or industry to waste on something as ordinary as sleep. A banker declares he hasn't closed his eyes before dawn in a decade, as though it were a medal of honor. A barrister counters that he too lies awake nightly, drafting arguments in his head. The brandy glows amber in the lamplight, and you realize the cure here is not medicine but storytelling, turning insomnia into a badge rather than a burden. Yet even in these smoky lounges, remedies circulated. One gentleman recommends Turkish coffee before bed, claiming paradoxically that stimulation makes him drowsy once the rush passes. Another swears by billiards until exhaustion overtakes him. A third insists on a glass of warm porter mixed with egg yolk, which you politely decline. Historians still argue whether these discussions reflected genuine medical advice or simply the camaraderie of sleepless men seeking validation. A quirky tidbit, some clubs kept cots in side rooms specifically for members who nodded off mid-conversation. Imagine falling asleep in full evening dress, top hat crooked, cigar still smoldering. Staff would quietly whisk away the ashtray and tuck a blanket over you as though this were all part of the service. In a way, perhaps it was the most expensive nap London could buy. You sip your brandy, the warmth tracing your throat, and watch the smoke curl upward. It's easy to see how these clubs transform sleeplessness into ritual. Instead of pacing alone in a dark room, you sat among peers, laughing, debating, complaining. The laughter itself was a kind of sedative. The debates, while hardly scientific, gave shape to the frustration, and if none of it worked, the brandy usually did. As you finally push back your chair and step into the cool night, the contrast hits you. The hush of the fog after the clamor of voices. Your head swims slightly, body loose, and for the first time tonight, sleep feels possible. Perhaps the gentlemen were right in their own way. Sometimes the cure lies not in solitude, but in sharing sleeplessness with others until it feels less like a curse and more like another story to tell. The club doors close behind you, and London's night feels quieter than ever. You wander back through the mist, past shuttered shops and dim gas lamps, your body heavy with the residue of brandy, warm bricks, lavender, sermons, and songs. Each cure you've tried lingers like footprints behind you, fading into the fog. Yet even now the city whispers of more remedies, last hopes for the sleepless who will try anything to make the darkness kinder. One pamphlet lists final remedies in neat columns. Rub your temples with vinegar, drink lettuce seed syrup, wear stockings soaked in camphor. Another recommends lying with your head to the north, claiming magnetic currents align the mind. You imagine Victorians dutifully rotating their beds to face invisible forces. Historians still argue whether these alignments reflect scientific curiosity or superstition dressed in respectable clothes. Perhaps both. You picture a weary clerk sitting by candlelight, carefully knotting a sachet of hops to tuck under his pillow. A seamstress stitches flannel belts to keep her stomach warm. A mother reads psalms until her voice trembles. A sailor home from sea breathes deeply of lavender water sprinkled on the sheets. Each cure is peculiar, yes, but each carries the same quiet faith that sleep can be coaxed if only the right ritual is found. There's a quirky tidbit worth savoring here. Some Victorians insisted on wearing mismatched socks to bed, convinced the imbalance tricked the body into surrendering. Imagine crawling beneath heavy quilts, feet clad in one striped wool and one plain gray, whispering to yourself, "This time it will work." You return to your room at last, the city's hum fading beyond the window. You settle onto the mattress, brick cooled, curtains drawn, lavender faint but lingering. The clock ticks steadily, a reminder that time moves on whether you rest or not. And in that realization lies a strange comfort. The rituals, the potions, the debates, they were never truly about conquering sleeplessness. They were about finding peace in the attempt. Your eyelids lower. The world softens. Victorian London, with all its odd cures and earnest hopes, seems to drift with you now, fading into dream. And now, as we near the end of our journey through foggy streets and flickering gaslight, let the voices of London's insomniacs fade gently away. The vendor's cries quieten, the watchman's staff no longer taps, and even the piano's nocturne has slipped into silence. All that remains is the faint hush of the city breathing, slow, steady, like the rhythm of your own chest. You've walked with the sleepless, sipped their bitter teas, curled beneath their mountains of blankets, and listened to their peculiar remedies whispered in the dark. Each cure was a story, each ritual a thread woven into the long fabric of night. And though some made you laugh, others made you wince, all carried the same gentle truth, that even in restlessness, there's a search for calm. Now you can let those images soften. Picture the lavender sachet crumbling into petals, the warm brick cooling in the hearth, the pendulum slowing until it finally rests. Let the fog lift from the streets, leaving only a quiet glow of dawn somewhere beyond the window. You don't need to chase any more cures. The night itself has already done its work. Allow your body to grow heavy as if the weight of every feather bed and flannel sheet has settled gently over you. Let your thoughts scatter like ashes from a coal fire, drifting upward and vanishing. The worries of the day, the clamor of the city, the restless turning, all can dissolve into quiet now. Sleep is not forced, but invited. And tonight you've prepared every invitation Victorian London could muster. So breathe slowly, sink deeper, and let the last lantern of wakefulness go dark. Sweet dreams.